A very good evening to you all. DVG belonged to the latter category. DVG has written on culture in an epigrammatic Baconian style. He accepts the Arnoldian definition of culture that it is the sum and substance of the best that has been the world. With his legendary erudition, DVG juxtaposes Western thinkers like Shakespeare, Matthew Arnold, Cardinal Newman, and Emerson with the opinions of Eastern savants like Valmiki, Manu, Bhasa, and Bhartrhari, in keeping with the dictum of Rigveda, let noble thoughts come to us from every angle. Ano bhadraha kratavo yantu vishvataha. One should not forget that DVG has done an exemplary translation of Shakespeare's Macbeth. In this background, it's in the fitness of things that Gokhale Institute of Public Affairs has arranged Dr. S. Ramaswamy Memorial First Lecture on Shakespeare's Hamlet, who had translated DVG's Samskruti into English in 2012 as Culture. It will not be inappropriate if I quote Ramaswamy's concluding remarks on DVG's Samskruti. A study of DVG's work Culture is itself an art of culture. Now, a brief note on Dr. S. Ramaswamy. S. Ramaswamy was educated in drama and theater at the University of California at Los Angeles under Walter Starkey, who was director of Abbey Theatre in Dublin before he became Emeritus Professor at UCLA. Ramaswamy was a senior Fulbright Fellow at the well-known Yale School of Drama and was Fellow of Yale University. He had studied Shakespeare at Stratford-upon-Avon under its director, Philip Broadbank, and had made a special study of London theatre productions. His PhD thesis was on Tennessee Williams, the famous American dramatist, and had discussed Broadway and off-Broadway in New York. He taught comparative drama and theatre for postgraduate students at Bangalore University for 38 years. He was a founder member of Bangalore Little Theatre and was its secretary between 1960 and 1964. He acted in plays by Shakespeare, Molière, Chekhov, John Osborne, Thornton Wilder, and has lectured extensively on drama and theatre in various universities in India and abroad. He was the recipient of the prestigious Phi Beta Kappa International Award for the year 1965 from the University of California. He was a British Council scholar at Oxford and London, a senior Fulbright Fellow at California, Texas, and Yale, and a Shastri Indo-Canadian scholar at McGill University, Montreal. He studied Sanskrit traditionally for 15 years and was the editor of Tattva-loka, a quarterly journal from Sringeri Sharada Peetham. He has translated S.L. Bhairappa's 4 novels into English, Sartha as Caravan, Oxford University publication, Tantu as Loom of Life, Niyogi Publishers, Delhi, Bitti, Prism Publishers, Bangalore, Mandra, Niyogi Publishers, Delhi, for which Bhairappa got the prestigious Saraswati Samman. His travelogue in Kannada, Alemaria Aledata, consists of his writings pertaining to England, Germany, Italy, Denmark, and France. S. Ramaswamy, popularly known as SR to his students as Shakespeare Ramaswamy, and had taught Hamlet for many years to postgraduate students. Hence, it is befitting that Professor Nagnath, whom Ramaswamy admired for his wide reading and literary insights, is giving the first lecture, Ramaswamy Memorial Lecture on Hamlet. Indeed, we are fortunate to have you, sir, on this evening in the august presence of this elite audience. T.S. Eliot calls Hamlet as the Mona Lisa of literature. According to Dover Wilson, Hamlet is the tragedy of a given caught fast in the toils of circumstances and unable to get out. According to J.R. Lowell, Hamlet, among all the characters of Shakespeare, is most eminently a metaphysician and a psychologist. The following Kannada translations of Hamlet are noteworthy. 1. M.S. Puttanna's translation as Hemalata, 1920. Y.M. Shenmukaya's translation of Hamlet, 1954. Masti Venkatesh Iyengar's translation, Hamlet, 1958. M. Anand Rao's Hamlet, 1970. And Ramchandra Deva's Hamlet, 1978. Professor S.D. Joshi of Pune has rendered Hamlet into Sanskrit as Chandrasenaha Durgadeshasya Yuvarajaha, and in 1992, it was staged during All India Oriental Conference at Pune. Ramaswamy always believed that the real test of an actor on the stage is to perform Hamlet. If he can do Hamlet, he can do any character on stage. This is what he believed. Now, a brief introduction to today's illustrious speaker, Professor S. Nagnath. Professor S. Nagnath is the son of well-known historian, scholar, and polyglot, Dr. S. Srikanta Shastri. He was born on 4th July 1953 at Mysore. The early schooling was done at Hardwick High School, Mysore. Later, he graduated from Maharaja College, University of Mysore in 1972. He took a postgraduate degree in English literature from University of Mysore in the year 1974, specializing in European classics. He happens to be a direct student of such eminent teachers as Padma Bhushana, Dr. C.D. Narasimhaya, Dr. U.R. Anantamurthy, Professor S. Anantanarayana, Professor G.H. Nayak, and Dr. C.D. Govind Rao. Professor Nagnath taught in the National College Autonomous Jayanagar and also in the National Degree College Basangudi and AES National College Gauri Bidnor. He retired in 2013 as professor and head of the Department of English from the National College Jayanagar, Bangalore. During his teaching career, he served as program officer of National Social Service Scheme and conducted several social welfare camps in villages. He attended a national integration camp as a leader of Bangalore University, NSS students delegation conducted by Navroji Wadia College, Pune in 1996. He has attended refresher courses at Mysore University Academic Staff College and at English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. He has worked as a resource person for Bangalore University Correspondence Course Institute and for Karnataka State Open University, Mysore. He has also contributed many significant articles to the English journal Aniketana, brought out by Karnataka Sahitya Academy, Bangalore. In recent years, he has delivered lectures on the Upanishads and Ramayana in seminars conducted by Bharati Vidya Bhavan and ISKCON. He is frequently invited by the Postgraduate Department of History and Philosophy of Mysore University to deliver lectures at the Academic Staff College and in national level seminars. He learned Yajurveda for 16 years from late Veda Brahma Pandit Venkatakrishna Sharma, former principal of Sri Chamarajendra Sanskrit College. Common factor between me and Professor Nagnath is that both of us were students of Venkatakrishna Sharma. Venkatakrishna Sharma taught me Advaita Vedanta in Chamarajendra Sanskrit College from 1976 to 1983 for 7 years, 5 hours per day, all the Prasthanatrayas. And that is Veda, this is Vedanta. So from Veda to Vedanta, we have got the shift. After all, Veda should culminate in Vedanta, you see. Therefore, we too are birds of the same flock, and we are Satshishyas of that great Guru. Since 2013, he has got his efforts to publish the various works of Dr. S. Srikanta Shastri. This is one way in which one can do Pitru Runa. So Nagnath has completed his Pitru Runa by publishing some of the classic works of his father, which should have gone unnoticed in the public, and that's the need of the hour, which any son can do for any father in 21st century, for which Nagnath is a living example. Some of the unpublished works have been published in the recent years. He has translated Bharatiya Samskruti by Dr. S. Srikanta Shastri into English with the title Indian Culture, a compendium of Indian history, culture, and heritage, published by Notion Press, and it will be available to the reading public from April 2021 onwards, that is next month. We are eagerly waiting for your book, sir. He has also produced and directed a documentary on Dr. S. Srikanta Shastri called A Votary of Truth. His dream project is to start Dr. S. Srikanta Shastri Memorial Library and Research Center at Mysore. Now, this Rang does not want to stand between you and Nag, not being the common factor between us. Over to Professor Nagnath.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I thank the office bearers of Gokhale Institute for Public Affairs, in the first place, for giving me an opportunity to address in this august hall before an august audience. Dr. S. Ranganath is a friend of mine. He has been very generous in his compliments to me. I thank him once again. Even I had written down my own tributes to Dr. S. Ramaswamy. I want to tell you at this juncture, I was not his direct student because I studied in Mysore, but we were all indirect students of Dr. S. Ramaswamy, because after coming to Bangalore in 1977, we regularly interacted with Professor Ramaswamy, and we used to meet him in seminars, conferences, bookshops, and in theater. Here is my tribute. It may sound repetitive because Dr. S. Ranganath has mentioned many of the things here. I may skip a few, but this is what I would like to state. Dr. S. Ramaswamy was born on 27th March 1932. His brilliant academic career began in Central College, Bangalore, and he passed BA Honours in English Literature in 1953 by securing first rank from University of Mysore. He studied MA in Maharaja College in 1954 and once again secured first rank and received Purna Krishna Rao Gold Medal. He acquired another MA degree in American Literature in 1966 from the University of California. He did research in American drama and theater, and his thesis dealt with the theme of frustration in Tennessee Williams' plays, and it was awarded a PhD degree by the Bangalore University. He studied Sanskrit under the guidance of a renowned traditional Sanskrit scholar. He was also fluent in French and German languages. I wish to mention here some of the fellowships, scholarships, and honors he received during his lifetime. I think they have been mentioned already by Ranganath, and I won't repeat it again, but I would like to say he has presented a number of papers on varied topics in national and international seminars. He was a life member of several national and international academic bodies. Dr. S. Ramaswamy was associated with BLT, or Bangalore Little Theatre, for 50 years. He is a great theatre aficionado and has acted in several plays. But for generation of students, he is known as Shakespeare Ramaswamy. His love for the great bard was infectious. His students majoring in English idolized him. But what is not known is he was greatly appreciated by BSc Science honors students and engineering students. He converted them into English literature addicts for the rest of their lifetime. Because I knew a lot of science students, physics honors, chemistry honors, economics honors students, and engineering students of UACE praising Dr. S. Ramaswamy as one of the best teachers of English, and they all became lovers of English literature because of him. He passed away peacefully at the age of 86 on 8th January 2019 in Bangalore. Before I read this section, I would like to show some slides of Stratford-upon-Avon, the birthplace of Shakespeare. I'm going to read a brief synopsis of the play Hamlet because many would not be knowing the story of Hamlet. So better to tell them the story first and then discuss my paper, which is titled as A Contemporary Indian Perspective of Shakespeare's Tragedy, Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. What you are seeing, of course, I visited this place in 2016, and I enjoyed it immensely, and Dr. S. Ramaswamy knew it like the back of his hand. This is Avon River, which flows by the side of Stratford town, and they have preserved the town as it is. And it has a 14th, 15th century environment. Next. This is Shakespeare's house, birthplace. And this is another photograph of the front of Shakespeare's house. This is Shakespeare's first daughter and Shakespeare's bedroom. And this is a marble bust of Shakespeare in the window. And this is his school classroom. He studied in a grammar school only up to 7th standard, and they have preserved his school. And this is the grave of Shakespeare. He is buried in the local church, and there's a warning on the grave, anyone who disturbs my bones will be cursed. And this is the first folio print of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. And this bench is a special bench. It is there in the garden. It was donated by the famous Shakespearean actor, John Gielgud. And he was president of International Shakespeare Association. And you know, the English people are very, very fond of theater, and Dr. S. Ramaswamy used to talk about it for hours together. Now, I will read the story of Hamlet. The action of the play Hamlet takes place in Elsinore, Denmark. The tragic hero, Prince Hamlet, is the son of the previous king, Elder Hamlet. At present, Denmark is ruled by his younger brother, Claudius. King Claudius has married his sister-in-law, Queen Gertrude. The play Hamlet is divided into 5 acts. In the first act, first scene of the play, the story unfolds in a dramatic fashion. The action begins in the middle of the night on the ramparts of the fort. The ghost of Elder Hamlet appears at midnight, and he has been dead for the last 2 months. Prince Hamlet has come from Wittenberg University, where he is studying, to attend his father's funeral. The sudden death of his father has brought him to Elsinore. King Claudius has told the courtiers and citizens that his elder brother died in garden by a snake bite while he was sleeping under a tree. Hamlet is very much upset by the sudden remarriage of his own mother to Claudius. Horatio is a good friend of Prince Hamlet. He has brought the news that the ghost of Elder Hamlet has been seen by the night guards, and on the next night, confirmed by the sighting of Horatio as well. But the ghost of Elder Hamlet refuses to speak to Horatio. Hence, Horatio informs Prince Hamlet about this strange phenomena that has occurred to the amazement of onlookers. On the next night, Prince Hamlet, a skeptic, comes with Horatio and guards to view the disturbing scene. At the appointed hour of 10 o'clock, the ghost of Elder Hamlet appears at the same spot. It beckons the prince to a secluded corner to speak to him confidentially. The ghost informs him that he did not die in the garden while he was asleep by a snake bite. His younger brother, Claudius, killed him by pouring poison into his ear. This lustful satire married the seemingly loyal queen within a month. The ghost of Elder Hamlet wanted him to take revenge for this despicable act of Claudius. He must avenge his father's death. But the ghost of Elder Hamlet requests his son to spare his wife Gertrude and leave her to heavens. In other words, he wants God to punish her in purgatory for her sins. The ghost is suffering in purgatory for his previous sins. He can only reach the gates of heaven only after the purification of his soul. The Prince Hamlet is angry, sad, and frustrated by this revelation made by the ghost. It is a challenge to kill Claudius, who is well protected by the guards. Polonius is the Lord Chamberlain of Denmark, and he is an aged gentleman. He has got a beautiful daughter called Ophelia. Prince Hamlet is in love with her. Polonius has a son called Laertes, who is a student in Paris. The strange behavior of Prince Hamlet raises suspicion in the mind of Claudius. Hamlet is given to brooding, talking to himself, and is depressed. Polonius thinks that Hamlet is a disappointed lover, as Ophelia has not warmed up to him. He advises his daughter not to be swayed by the wooing of Hamlet. Prince Hamlet is son of the former king and nominated as a successor to the throne by the present king, Claudius. Before leaving for Paris, Laertes advises his sister not to be too free in her affection towards Hamlet. He thinks it is mere dalliance on the part of Hamlet. Polonius's advice to his son before his departure to Paris contains gems of wisdom gifted to humanity by Shakespeare. They are relevant for all time to come. King Claudius looks upon the eccentric behavior of Prince Hamlet with suspicion. Queen Gertrude thinks that her over-hasty marriage is responsible for Hamlet's madness. Claudius sends for Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, two childhood friends of Hamlet. He wants to use them as spies to ferret out the truth of the mystery. These two are parasites and only good at sponging over the king and the queen. Polonius, to prove his theory, lets loose Ophelia upon Hamlet. Hamlet can see through Ophelia and expresses his anger towards her. He knows she is a puppet in the hands of Polonius. The whole argument between Hamlet and Ophelia is overheard by the king and Polonius, who are hiding behind the screen. King and Polonius, who are hiding behind the screen. Rosencrantz informs Prince Hamlet a traveling troupe of players have come to Elsinore to entertain the royalty. Hamlet is excited by this new development. He knows the players very well and wants to use them for his ends. Hamlet is in a dilemma over the question of taking revenge for his father's murder. This has been revealed to him by the ghost. He does not know whether the devil has come to him in the shape of his father. He is incapable of taking a quick decision and given to delay. The play staged by the visiting players is called The Mousetrap. The storyline is similar to the incidents that took place in Denmark, like the death of an old king in the garden while sleeping. The villain comes and pours poison into the ear of the sleeping king. After the death of the king, he usurps to the throne and marries the queen. These scenes from the play upsets the king Claudius terribly. He walks out of the theater in an angry mood. The queen Gertrude sends for Hamlet and waits in her bedroom. Polonius is once again playing the role of a spy, and he is hiding behind the curtain. In this highly charged emotional atmosphere, Hamlet takes his mother to the task. He tells her that Claudius is a murderer, and he has also committed adultery. He asks her how she could stoop to marry such a despicable fellow. Her first husband, Elder Hamlet, is compared to the god Apollo. At this moment, the ghost of Elder Hamlet appears once again. Only Hamlet can see and hear the ghost. The ghost wants to protect his beloved wife from the mental torture heaped upon her by Prince Hamlet. She thinks he is addressing the thin air as a mad fellow. When he becomes violent towards Gertrude, the Lord Chamberlain makes noises behind the curtain in anguish. Prince Hamlet draws his dagger and stabs him, thinking that it is Claudius, who is hiding there. Soon he comes to know he has killed Polonius by sheer accident. King Claudius realizes that his own life is in danger. He decides to send Prince Hamlet to England in the company of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. But Hamlet, in the middle of the night, manages to steal the letter addressed to the King of England. King Claudius wanted a special favor from the King of England. He wants Prince Hamlet to be beheaded immediately after his arrival in England. Hamlet writes another formal letter to the King of England in his fine handwriting, asking him to dispose of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern immediately after their arrival, as they are enemies of the state. Next morning, their ship is attacked by a pirate ship. During the fight, Prince Hamlet lands on the pirate ship during the thick of fighting. The pirate ship moves away from the Danish ship going to England. The pirates realize the worth of Prince Hamlet and bring him back to Denmark on a promise of payment of ransom. Hamlet is back in Denmark without the knowledge of Claudius. In the meanwhile, Ophelia has truly gone mad because of Polonius's death, and she has been spurred in love by Prince Hamlet. Laertes has also come back from Paris to take revenge against Claudius for the murder of his father. He has raised a small band of soldiers to strengthen his cause. Prince Fortinbras of Norway wants right of passage through Denmark to go to Poland. He wants to recover a small patch of land which once belonged to Norway. This barren land is not worth 10 ducats. He is prepared to sacrifice the lives of 2,000 soldiers to recover this land. He is permitted to pass through Denmark by King Claudius. The mad Ophelia accidentally falls into a lake and drowns. Her funeral is arranged by the king. In the meanwhile, king has managed to pacify and placate Laertes. He has convinced him that Prince Hamlet is responsible for the death of Polonius and also for the death of Ophelia. Claudius tells him that he will arrange a fencing match between Prince Hamlet and Laertes. During the fight, through subterfuge, he can kill Hamlet and take his revenge. In the grave digger scene, we see two clowns digging a grave for a dead person. They are joking and drinking. Hamlet and Horatio are amused by their mirth. They come to know these two clowns are digging a grave for a woman. Soon we see a funeral procession winding its way to the graveyard. Hamlet and Horatio, from their hiding place, realize that Ophelia is dead. Laertes jumps into the grave and declares his eternal love for his sister. He wants the grave diggers to bury him along with his sister with a mound of earth. Hamlet can no longer control himself, and he jumps into the grave and proclaims 40,000 brothers could not have loved as much as he did love Ophelia. So a fight breaks out between Hamlet and Laertes in the grave. They are separated by the soldiers and pulled out of the grave. King Claudius cunningly organizes a fencing bout between Hamlet and Laertes in the castle. Claudius has taken a bigger wager on behalf of his nephew Hamlet to show his love and affection. Laertes has brought a sword unabated and dipped in poison to kill Hamlet. Prince Hamlet is equally good in fencing, and initially he has an upper hand. During the fight, Laertes manages to injure Hamlet. As the fight continues, their swords drop to the ground, and when they pick it up, it has been exchanged. Now Hamlet has got the poisoned sword. He manages to give Laertes a cut. King Claudius has put poison into the chalice containing wine. The Queen Gertrude wants to celebrate the performance of Hamlet by drinking the wine. The king tries to prevent her, but to no avail. Gertrude drinks wine and falls to the ground, dead. Laertes tells Hamlet that their time is running out as the poison has entered their bloodstream. Prince Hamlet, in the last act of revenge, stabs King Claudius with the poisoned edge of the sword, so we have 4 dead bodies on the stage. The English ambassadors arrive on the scene with the news of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern's deaths. Horatio tells them that the king is dead and his intentions were different. The victorious Fortinbras, Prince of Norway, is back from Poland. He says so many dead bodies in the court hall reminds him of a battlefield strewn with dead bodies. Fortinbras, who is distantly related to the royal family of Denmark, lays claim to the throne. Horatio tells him that was also the desire of Prince Hamlet that Fortinbras should succeed Claudius. With this, the play concludes. This is the tragic story of Hamlet. Right from beginning till the end, it is very disturbing and sad. My main paper deals with some of the important themes in the play. A contemporary Indian perspective of Shakespeare's tragedy, Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. William Shakespeare does not need an introduction to Indian readers. This great English playwright began his career by writing comedies and then historical plays. The 5 great tragic plays are Julius Caesar, 1599, Hamlet, 1599, 1601, Othello, 1603, 1604, King Lear, 1605, 1606, and Macbeth, 1606. The critics consider the tragedy of Hamlet as the greatest tragic play in English language. It is the longest play of Shakespeare with 30,557 words. That is why it is rarely performed in total by theatrical companies. The original story of Hamlet is found in the book Gesta Danorum, written by Saxo Grammaticus, a Danish historian. The source of the play is Danish. This old Norse tale dates back to pre-13th century AD, and it is called Amlet, which means mad or not sane in Old Norse language. During the final phase of William Shakespeare's playwriting career, he was plagued by personal tragedies like the death of his son Hamlet. His son was named Hamlet. His critics, especially the university wits, had considered him as an understudy with his grammar school education. He never went to any university. Robert Greene, another dramatist, describes him as, within quotes, "For there is an upstart crow," he's called a crow, "beautified with our feathers, that with his tiger's heart, wrapped in a player's hide, supposes he is as well able to bombast out a blank verse as the best of you, and being an absolute Johannes factotum, is in his own conceit the only Shake scene in a country." Unquote. These words of Robert Greene, a university which shows to what extent they were jealous of Shakespeare's success as a dramatist in London. Shakespeare came to London with grammar school education, and his first job was that of a stable boy looking after horses outside Globe Theatre. He next became an apprentice to a lawyer. He began his dramatic career as a bit player, prompter of lines to actors, and began to polish the lines of other playwrights, which was detested by the playwrights. In due course, he became an independent playwright. He offered to the public, like modern-day film script writers, they give what the audience wants. Shakespeare gave what the audience wanted. What they wanted. His plays contained romance, fights, bawdy humor, vulgar humor, and many a tragic scene. He gave them ghosts, witches, clowns, and unforgettable villains. Shakespeare's Hamlet observes the three dramatic unities mentioned by Aristotle in his Poetics. They are the unity of time, unity of action, and unity of place. The story of Hamlet takes place in the king's castle at Elsinore, Denmark. The action of the story is continuous and uninterrupted, hence Shakespeare has proved his critics wrong. The play functions at different levels. The tragic play can be considered as a revengeful drama. The theme of the play appears to be adultery and incest. The play also deals with a power struggle resulting in political assassination. Hamlet's disillusionment with his mother Gertrude can be interpreted as an extension of Oedipal complex. Hamlet ends up as an unrequited lover of Ophelia. In the very first act, first scene, Francisco, a soldier, says to Horatio, "And I am sick at heart." Later, the same idea is echoed through these words, "There is something rotten in the state of Denmark." These words set the tone for the tragic play, within quotes, sickness and rottenness, which are gnawing at the entrails of Denmark. Horatio also says in Act 1, Scene 1, after seeing the ghost, within quotes, "This bodes some eruption to our state." When Horatio says, within inverted commas, "A mote it is to trouble the mind's eye," he is completely off the mark about the dark clouds looming over Denmark, signifying the coming of the doomsday. Prince Hamlet is already disillusioned, disappointed, and disgusted with life, and says, these are the words of Hamlet. In the very beginning of the play, he says this, "How weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fie on it." Ha, fie. Fie means spit on it. He is disillusioned with the world. And this sums up his disinterestedness in life. His mother, Gertrude, marries his uncle, King Claudius, within 2 months of elder Hamlet's death. Prince Hamlet makes a general statement clubbing all the members of the fairer sex into one lot by saying, within quotes, "Frailty, thy name is woman." The atmosphere of the play is dark and sombre, right from Scene 1, Act 1, and as the play progresses, it becomes more and more murkier. The play Hamlet deals with multiple themes and subplots. One can discuss the play under these two categories: play of revenge, Greek elements of fate and destiny. Hamlet as a play of revenge. A large number of European medieval plays are classified as revenge plays. The human beings have a strong instinct for revenge. Prince Hamlet is prompted by the ghost of elder Hamlet to seek revenge for the murder of his father, elder Hamlet, King of Denmark. The heartless villain, the younger brother, King Claudius, kills his elder brother without any remorse. He wants to get rid of the aged king so that he can usurp the throne. He is also secretly in love with his sister-in-law, Gertrude, the mother of Prince Hamlet. Claudius wants to gain political power. He is also prompted by his lustful and amorous feelings towards Gertrude. Her son, Prince Hamlet, is 30 years old at the time of the action of the play. In Act 1, Scene 2, King Claudius declares Prince Hamlet as the future successor to the throne of Denmark. He addresses Hamlet as my cousin Hamlet and my son. And my son appears as an afterthought. Prince Hamlet mutters in an aside, a little more than kin and less than kind, which is full of bitter sarcasm. Queen Gertrude wants to assuage Hamlet's sorrow over the death of his father, so she tells him, within quotes, "Do not forever with thy veiled lids Seek for thy noble father in the dust. Thou knowest it is common, all that live must die, passing through nature to eternity. Prince Hamlet replies sarcastically, within quotes, "Aye, madam, it is common." Prince Hamlet, after this interview, can only express his disgust, dismay, and disdain for his mother and uncle. His desire to commit suicide and escape from the shackles of this world in these words, "Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew, or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon against self-slaughter." But his thoughts of suicide are blocked by the religious injunction and the foreboding words of the ghost, "Revenge is foul and most unnatural murder." The ghost describes his younger brother Claudius as "I, that incestuous, that adulterate beast, who conspired to kill him." He was dispatched to the next world in a hurry, and he describes it thus: "Thus was I sleeping by a brother's hand of life, of crown, of queen, at once dispatched. Cut off even in the blossoms of my sin, unhouseled, disappointed, and unannulled." The ghost of Elder Hamlet instructs Prince Hamlet not to punish his mother for her adulterous behavior and leave her to heaven. After his meeting with the ghost, Prince Hamlet can only describe his mother as, within quotes, "Oh, most pernicious woman." And Claudius is adjudged as, within quotes, "Oh, villain, villain, smiling, damned villain, my table's meat it is I set it down, that one may smile and be a villain." In Act 2, Scene 2, Prince Hamlet exclaims after his meeting with the itinerant players, calls himself, within quotes, "a dull and muddy metalled rascal, peaked like John O'Dreams, unpregnant of my cause, and can say nothing." He blames himself for the delay caused by his procrastinating nature in seeking revenge for his father's death. When the play within the play is staged, we learn Queen Gertrude was not aware that her first husband, King Hamlet, was murdered by Claudius in the garden. The play, also called Play Within the Play or Mousetrap, successfully catches the conscience of the king. After the play is called off and Hamlet is going to the bedchamber of his mother, he sees King Claudius praying in the chapel. He could have killed him easily, but did not want to send him to heaven because he was praying to God. In his mother's bedroom, Prince Hamlet reprimands, scolds, and holds a mirror up to the adulterous nature of Gertrude by employing very harsh language. She fails to see the ghost of Elder Hamlet in her room. She comes to conclusion that her son is raving mad because he is addressing the thin air. When Gertrude tells him that he has broken her heart into two pieces, he advises her, "Oh, throw away the worser part of it and leave the purer with the other half. Good night, but go not to my uncle's bed. Assume a virtue if you have it not." She appears to be a frivolous and flippant lady who has fallen into a trap laid by Claudius. She is not aware of his evil schemes, like getting rid of Prince Hamlet's life in England. She comes to know about the assassination of King Hamlet only through Prince Hamlet. In Act 5, Scene 2, Queen drinks inadvertently the poisoned wine, which is meant for Hamlet, and dies. She dies at the hands of King Claudius. The King Claudius is killed by Prince Hamlet with the poisons. Mix up again. Excuse me. The famous soliloquy, I just want to show it to you on the screen. Sir Laurence Olivier's rendition of "To Be or Not to Be." He's contemplating suicide, and his disillusionment comes out. And this you can see for yourself from the film.
If I could please request the lights to be dimmed here. Thank you.
not to be? That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing, end them. To die, to sleep no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep, to sleep. A chance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delays, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin? Who would fardels bear, to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, puzzles the will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have, than fly to others that we know not of. Thus conscience doth make cowards of us all. And thus the native hue of resolution is sicklied o'er with the pale cast of thought. And enterprises of great pith and moment, with this regard their currents turn awry, and lose the name of action.
We have one more important scene. That also, I would like to screen it now. Polonius, he is Chamberlain of Denmark, and he gives an advice to his son. He's a university student. This advice of Polonius is full of wisdom and sagacity, and it has withstood the test of time. And you get a universal message from Shakespeare about the life of a young man and what kind of life he should lead. We are going to show that Polonius advising his son, and look at the words he utters.
Caution thought his act, be thou familiar, but by no means vulgar. Those friends thou hast, and their adoption tried, grapple them to thy soul with hoops of steel, but do not dull thy palm with entertainment of each new hatched, unfledged comrade. Beware of entrance to a quarrel, but being in, bear that the opposed may beware of thee. Give every man thine ear, but few thy voice. Cost thy habit as thy purse can buy, but not expressed in fancy. Rich, not gaudy, for the apparel oft proclaims the man. Neither a borrower nor a lender be, for loan oft loses both itself and friend, and borrowing dulls the edge of husbandry. This above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night the day, thou canst not then be false to any man. Farewell, my blessing season this in thee.
Most humbly do I take my leave, my lord.
The time invites you, go.
Farewell, Ophelia. And remember well what I said to you.
'Tis in my memory locked, and you yourself shall keep the key of it.
Farewell.
What is Ophelia he hath said to you?
So please you, something touching the Lord Hamlet.
Mary, well bethought. What is between you? Give me up the truth.
He hath, my lord, of late made many tenders of his affection to me.
Affection? Pooh! You speak like a green girl, unshifted in such perilous circumstance. Do you believe his tenders, as you call them?
I do not know, my lord, what I should think.
Mary, I'll teach you. Think yourself a baby. I would not in plain terms from this time forth have you give words or talk with the Lord Hamlet. Look to't, I charge you.
Hello. The second section of my paper deals with Greek elements of fate and destiny that are there in this tragic play. The tragic play of Shakespeare is described as a sombre and dark play with very little daylight intruding it into its murky atmosphere. We see sunlight only in Gravedigger's scene, that too during Ophelia's funeral. The appearance of the ghost of Elder Hamlet is described by Horatio as, within quotes, and even the like precurse of fierce events as harbingers preceding still the fates, and prologue to omen coming on, unquote. In other words, the appearance of the ghost forebodes a calamity to the state of Denmark. Prince Hamlet throughout the play is torn between forces of fate and free will. After his meeting with the ghost, he tells his friend Horatio, "There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy." He is aware of a divine force which shapes man's destiny. Prince Hamlet does some introspection while uttering these words, within quotes, "The time is out of joint, O cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right," unquote. Can he bring order and harmony into the chaotic state of Denmark? In the famous soliloquy, "To be or not to be," that you watched it now, Prince Hamlet is contemplating suicide as an avenue of escape from worldly problems. In this quotation, we see the conflict between fate and free will. The slings and arrows of outrageous fortune are to take arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. What prevents him from an act of suicide is the moral injunction of religion. Thus, conscience does make cowards of us all. The religious Christian values and the fear of the unknown land of death prevents us from, when he himself might his quietus make with a bare bodkin, that is a knife. He is holding the knife in his hand. In Greek tragic plays, the protagonist appears to be at the mercy of fate. He is doomed to suffer like King Oedipus. We also wonder here whether Prince Hamlet's destiny was sealed by fate. The critics often argue over his nature of procrastination, that is, delaying things, putting off things, as a flaw in the character. We ask ourselves, why does he not trust the words of the ghost? What need was there to stage play within a play to confirm his doubts? Prince Hamlet appears to be a virtuous character surrounded by mimic men, and the only exception is his good friend Horatio. The King Claudius is a wily villain with two cardinal sins on his head, one of murder and the other of adultery. Polonius, the Chamberlain of the state of Denmark, is pompous, vain, shallow, and given to abject sycophancy. Laertes, Rosencrantz, Guildenstern, and Osric are men made of straw without any substance. If one wants to fix the age of Queen Gertrude, she must be at least 50 years old, because her son Hamlet is 30 years of age in the play. She appears to be given to a life of sloth and luxury. She also appears to have a large sexual appetite. She marries Claudius within 2 months of her husband's death. Prince Hamlet tells Horatio, within quotes, "Thruft, thruft, Horatio, the funeral baked meats did coldly furnish forth the marriage tables," unquote. Prince Hamlet, in the bedroom scene, asks his mother to assume a virtue, even if she does not have one. She does not seem to be aware of what is going on in her court. Her attitude towards Ophelia is clinical and synthetic. She is least interested in her son's romance with Ophelia as a dutiful mother. Ophelia is a young and inexperienced girl. She appears to be a soft putty and malleable to unwarranted influence upon her from Polonius and Laertes. Does she really go mad? It is a choice between pretended madness of Hamlet and disoriented madness of Ophelia. We cannot come to any conclusion whether Ophelia committed suicide or was it an accidental death. In Act 5, Scene 2, before the fencing bout, Horatio offers to defer this match as Hamlet is feeling queasy. He is uneasy about the coming fight. But Hamlet is prepared to embrace his fate. So he says, he is fatalistic. He is prepared to die. He is prepared to face his fate and accept whatever comes. Not a whit we defy augury. There is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. There is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. Shakespeare is saying, when a sparrow falls from the branch and dies on the ground, it is God's will. It is a divine thing. It is destiny. If it be not to come, it will be now. We think it will not happen now, it will happen now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. He says, the readiness to die. We should be ready to die, embrace it at any moment, since no man has aught of what he leaves. No man leaves anything behind. What is it to leave betimes? This memorable quote of Bard of Avon is reminiscent of the famous Sanskrit quotation, Tena vina trunamapi na chalati. Without my knowledge, even a blade of grass will not stir. The same thing here applies, the fall of a sparrow. How is Prince Hamlet judged by his creator, William Shakespeare? We can answer this question through the words of Ophelia, within quotes. Oh, what a noble mind is here overthrown. She is sorry for him because he has gone mad. That's what she thinks. Oh, what a noble mind is here overthrown. The courtiers, soldiers, scholar's eye, tongue, sword. He has all these qualities, noble qualities. He is a fine courtier, a great soldier. He is a scholar, and he can speak marvelously, beautifully, and he can use the sword and fight like a soldier. The expectancy and rose of the fair state. Parents have a lot of expectations of him. the glass of fashion, a model young man, and the mold of form, the absurd of all observers. He is the absurd of all observers. Quite down, now completely ruined, destroyed. At the end of the play, Horatio plays handsome tribute to the departed prince. This is a tribute from his best friend Horatio. Now cracks a noble heart, good night, sweet prince, and flights of angels sing thee to thy rest. Now, coming to the last section of my paper, critics on Hamlet. I just want to read a few critics and what they think of this great play. The play Hamlet deals with various philosophical theories like relativism, existentialism, and skepticism. Hamlet expresses a relativist idea when he says to Rosencrantz, within quotes, "There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so." One can read double meaning to the word, within quotes, is, which introduces the question of whether anything is or can be if thinking doesn't make it so. This is related to the soliloquy, to be or not to be speech, where to be can be read as a question of existence. Second quote, Hamlet's character is not only intricate, but unintelligible. After reading the play 20 times, we still feel we have not understood Hamlet. Hamlet remains a mystery. Now this statement might mean something unobjectionable and even perhaps true and important. It might mean that the character cannot be wholly understood. This quotation is from Professor A.C. Bradley, famous critic of Shakespeare. Hamlet appeals powerfully to our sense of the mystery of life, but so does every good tragedy. And it does so not because the hero is an enigma to us, but because having a fair understanding of him, we feel how strange. I think this is what we feel about so many talented and great people. When they fall from their pedestal, this is how we feel. We feel how strange it is that strength and weakness should be so mingled in one soul, and that this soul should be doomed to such misery and apparent failure. To such misery. Hamlet is miserable and doomed to failure. A.C. Bradley. Ophelia also has been defended by feminists, most notable by Elaine Showalter. Ophelia is surrounded by powerful men. She is controlled by men. Her father, brother, and Hamlet. All three disappear. Laertes leaves for Paris. Hamlet abandons her, stops loving her, and Polonius dies. Conventional theories had argued that without these three powerful men making decisions for her, Ophelia was driven to madness. Feminist theorists argue that she goes mad with guilt because when Hamlet kills her father, he has fulfilled her sexual desire to have Hamlet kill her father so they can be together. This is a Freudian interpretation. Freud proceeds from his recognition of what he perceives to be fundamental contradiction in the text. The play is built upon Hamlet's hesitations over fulfilling the task of revenge that is assigned to him, but its text offers no reasons or motives for these hesitations. We don't come across valid reasons or motives for the delay. This is German playwright Goethe commenting on Hamlet. Goethe feels Hamlet suffers from paralysis of over-intellectualization. I think so many people are victims of this. They theorize and theorize and theorize, and often they're lost. Hamlet is a pathologically irresolute character, Goethe. Maynard Max says, Hamlet's world is preeminently in the interrogative mood. Throughout the drama, there are questions and questions and questions and questions. And often readers and viewers must answer them. It reverberates with questions. Harold Bloom, the famous American critic, says, Hamlet represents self-satisfaction and self-loathing respectively. Self-satisfaction and self-loathing. This is by T.S. Eliot. Hamlet, the man, is dominated by an emotion which is inexpressible because it is in excess of the facts as they appear. It is exaggerated, blown up. According to T.S. Eliot, Hamlet's true feelings are unknowable because they do not find adequate representation in the play. This is another famous remark of Eliot. The objective correlative requires the emotion in art be expressed through an equivalent, or as Eliot puts it, within quotation marks, a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events which shall be the formula of the particular emotion. A set of objects, a situation, a chain of events which shall be the formula of the particular emotion. Emotion cannot be expressed directly. Eliot says, but when the external facts which must terminate in sensory experience are given, the emotion is immediately evoked. T.S. Eliot calls Hamlet an artistic failure. According to him, Hamlet is the Mona Lisa of literature. Mona Lisa is a painting which cannot be understood, which cannot be analyzed, and the smile is enigmatic. A work that is interesting, but not a work of art. Eliot says, it is interesting, but not a work of art. It means the writer is unable to objectify the emotions. Correlative, the meaning of correlative, having a mutual relationship, corresponding rights, whether moral or legal, can involve correlative duties, a word or concept that has a mutual relationship with another word or concept. With this, I end my paper, and if there are any questions, I welcome them, and I will try to answer your questions. Thank you.
So far, we have heard a marvelous lecture on Shakespeare's Hamlet and the different perspectives with which this complex play can be understood, analyzed, criticized, or not to be properly understood also from one point of view or the other, because it's the most complex of all the plays of Shakespeare. Professor Nagnath started with the plot of Hamlet because that is a must, because we as foreigners to English, though English may be foreign to us, from English point of view, we are foreigners to English, and therefore he started off with the plot construction, how exactly Hamlet has been dealt with in 5 acts. He talked about the critics on Hamlet, the most important critics, Eliot, Goethe, and others, various Freudian interpretation of Hamlet, the existentialist view, then Goethe's interpretation of Hamlet. This is where one can draw a parallel between Hamlet and Shakuntala, because Goethe has got the maximum praise for Shakuntala. And to be or not to be, that's the question. That is the key soliloquy which was beautifully brought out by Professor Nagnath with a visual demonstration. And my father used to tell that whenever he used to visit Washington Folger Library at Washington, D.C., 4th floor underground, we have got 122,312 manuscripts only on that one line, to be or not to be, that's the question. How to pronounce that? That is the question, that is the question, that's the question, or that's the question. Wherever you stress that particular word, the meaning differs. So that's the complexity of that particular thing, and I'm sure wherever he is, he would have enjoyed this particular lecture of Professor Nagnath for dealing that in a most comprehensive way with the visual medium. Of course, visual medium always matters a lot because one photo is equal to 1,000 words. And we thoroughly enjoyed his particular lecture. And finally, I want to give my humble thanks to Professor Nagnath in the words of Hamlet. An act has 3 branches. It is to act, to do, and to perform. Act 4, Scene 7 of Shakespeare's Hamlet. That's exactly what Professor Nagnath has done this evening, and I hope all of you have enjoyed. And on behalf of Gokhale Institute of Public Affairs, and on your behalf and on my own behalf, I take this wonderful opportunity of thanking and expressing our grateful thanks for this beautiful lecture demonstration on Hamlet, which came from the heart of Professor Nagnath and which reached our hearts. Therefore, literature, if it cannot reach the heart of a person, it has no value. Therefore, always the people who talk about literature, they feel literature and they also make others feel about that. So that is what Professor Nagnath has done. And on behalf of Gokhale Institute of Public Affairs, may I now request, now I request Sri B.S. Ramu to kindly honor the illustrious speaker, because he always escapes to come on the stage. He is a backstage worker and is a karma yogi. I don't leave him today because I have told him and he has kindly obliged to this. And we are also grateful to Sri Ramu, who has been so kind enough to do all the programs single-handedly. And he manages the stage so well. And today also, with the special technique of this visual media and all that, he and his associates have done a wonderful job. And on my own behalf and on behalf of all of you, I profusely thank the illustrious speaker, Professor Nagnath, who could find time to be with us, though the program was preponed a little from the original schedule. And also, we thank the organizers and especially Sri B.S. Ramu, whom I always consider as one of my friends and a karma yogi, who has been doing a single-handed job in this August Assembly. Thank you very much.